Hey, this is Pastor Vernon, and I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my sermons. If you have any questions or want to reach out and connect, you can find me on Instagram or vernon@christianhillschurch.com.
If you would bow your heads with me this morning. Jesus, we just come into this room, we come into this place expecting you this morning. And God, I want to invite you into this room, not because you're not here, but because I want you here. I want you to do something in us this morning. I want you to do something within us that doesn't just stay in this building, but as we walk out, it goes with us. And God, for that to happen, you have to open up our minds. You have to open up our ears to listen. You have to open up our hearts to let truth in that we don't want in. So God, I pray you'd take our hearts and you'd soften them this morning. Jesus, we love you. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. My kids, at least from the ages of like 1 to 3, have been spectacularly bad at hide and seek. No, listen, my kids are amazing. They have tons of talents. Declan, for instance, recently has taken up magic. He saw a magician, and he's gotten very inspired. One of his favorite tricks right now is to take 2 cards. He'll let you pick one. You puts them back in, shuffles them around, and then flips it over and says, "Is this your card?" And about 50% of the time, it is pure magic. It is it is a blast. But from real young to about 3, they have just been spectacularly bad at hide and seek. Cooper's obsessed with it right now. But listen, he's getting better. Not long ago, I was playing with him, and it started to go on like a little bit too long. And it was like 10 minutes in, and I'm starting to get really nervous of like, did something happen? And I ended up finding him like tucked in the hamper in our room. So he's getting better. But when they're young, he's just like really beautifully bad at hide and seek. You know what I'm talking about? Like legs sticking out from under the blanket, right? Or under the bed, or like under a blanket in the middle of the living room, or like not all the way in the closet. There's like appendages sticking out still. It's just so fun. But I was thinking about it, and I wonder if it's not just that they're like bad at hiding. I think that there's a part of them that wants to be found. Like if you wait too long, or if they can't hear you coming, they start to yell or growl, or you hear them like giggling. They're basically like narrating their way to you. It's like hiding is just the setup, right? What they actually want is that moment when you open the closet door or you pull the blanket off and you're like, oh, they want to be found. And I don't think that impulse ever really leaves us. I think I can prove it to you. I brought some charts. You know me. I love a good chart. I love some data, so buckle up. Here's what the data shows. Since 1985, roughly, and before 1985, we just don't have great data. So since 1985, loneliness has been rising. It's slowly at first, but then something shifts around 2012 or so. And in just the 11 years between 2012 and 2023, which is hard to see, but it's the end of that chart, all the way on the right. So between those 10 years, loneliness rose more than it had in the previous 20 years by almost double. Today, 3 out of 5 people say that they are lonely often. During that same period, we also saw a decrease in the number of people who say that they have close friends. In 1985, it was around 3. In 2023, people reported 1 close friend. And the amount of people that said that they had 0 close friends tripled in that same time period. It got bad enough that actually not too long ago, the U.S. Surgeon General declared this loneliness, a public health epidemic. I don't exactly know how they do research on this, but they say that being lonely does the same amount of damage to your body as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Pause for a second. That means that loneliness is now a medical diagnosis. Here's where it gets interesting, though, is in that same window of time, while loneliness is rising and close friendships are collapsing, humanity built something that was supposed to fix this. They built technology that promised that we could connect to everyone from anywhere at any time. The blue line there is the amount of people using social media in the adult population. We were essentially sold a bill of goods. And I'm not here to guilt anyone into deleting Instagram or Snapchat or I honestly don't know what y'all are using nowadays. I don't actually think that that's the core of the problem. But I do want to point out that how is it the thing that was supposed to fix this made the chart worse? We are now more lonely and more connected than we have ever been. And at the heart, that's not a technology problem. This isn't a technology problem. In fact, I think it's a human problem. It's a Cooper hiding under a blanket in the middle of the living room problem. Because a lot of us are living like that right now. We're surrounded by people and somehow still unseen. We're connected, but we're not known. We're around so much noise, and yet we're starving for presence. And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Now, when I find Cooper, when we're playing hide and go seek and I find Cooper, he doesn't pout. He's not like, oh, I lost hide and seek again. No, when I find Cooper, he shouts, my turn! Right? He's like, it's my turn now, because being found turns Cooper into a finder. And that's what Luke 19 in the story of Zacchaeus is so relevant for us today. This is not just like some cute kid story about some vertically challenged tree climber. It is a story about a man who no one wanted, who tried to get one quick look at Jesus and found something so much better that Jesus was already looking for him. So if you have your Bibles this morning, I'd love for you to open them to Luke chapter 19. Luke chapter 19. I'll also have it on the screens for you. But I encourage you to follow along in your Bible this morning. Luke chapter 19, starting in verse 1. Verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus, and he was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. So here's where we're at in the story. Jesus has been on the move, traveling from city to city, healing, proclaiming the kingdom of God for a long time. For almost 10 chapters of Luke are about this specifically. The teaching, the healing, the telling parables. But Jesus is on the move. Scholars call this section in Luke the travel narrative. He left Galilee all the way back in Luke 9, and since then, he's been going from city to city, pointing towards one destination. He's got one place in mind that he's going, and it is the capital city of Jerusalem. Everything in Luke is pointing that direction. That's where the religious establishment is. That's where all of the power is, and that's where the cross will be. And he knows where he's heading. He knows what's coming. And Jericho is the last stop on the way before we get there. So you can see he's come all the way down from Galilee up in the northern region. He's come down through by the Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea. And Jericho is the one last stop before we get to Jerusalem. But it's not some like sleepy little village. Jericho actually sits right at the intersection of two major trade routes. One was running east and west, and the other was running north and south. It's not a perfect comparison, but I would think of it a lot like Las Vegas today. It's this oasis desert town. It's like a junction point for commerce and for travel and for entertainment, with like this bustling economy running through it. And with all of this economic activity, with trade going through, etc., you do pretty well if you happen to say, we're a tax collector, yeah? But Jesus is just passing through. This is just a checkpoint, a layover toward what he's going to. But it's here in this layover town that we meet our main character, Zacchaeus. Most of us already know one very specific thing about Zacchaeus, don't we? We know that Zacchaeus was a wee little man. That's right, and a wee little man was he. For he climbed up in a... That's right, for the... Absolutely. That is exactly right. If any of you help out or volunteer in kids ministry, that was a test. You all passed. You all are welcome to volunteer now. But also just be encouraged. When was the last time you sang that song, huh? See? Okay, well, okay. That was unfair, Tatiana. For the rest of you who don't preach K3, or teach K3, it's good what we remember, isn't it? But what an unfortunate thing to be remembered for, yeah? To be a wee little man 2,000 years later, and the only thing that somebody thinks about when they think about your name is how short you were. And just to be clear, like, I don't have biblical evidence for this, but I think to be called wee, you need to be like under, less than 3 inches below the national average. And I want to be super clear. I'm 5'8", and I'm only 1 inch below the national average. So anyways, let's move on. Zacchaeus wasn't just short in stature, though. He was also short on social standing, because the man lived in the margins of society. It wasn't just that he was a tax collector, though that certainly would have been enough, because tax collectors in the first century, we talk about them a lot, they were not like IRS agents today. They were Jewish citizens who essentially sold out to Rome. Rome occupied the land, and they'd become contracted out to like the actual collections of taxes to the locals. Tax collectors were local Jews who collected Roman taxes and customs from their own people. And here's the problem, is oftentimes they were overcharging them to enrich themselves while helping fund the very empire that oppressed them. Most tax collectors, the only way they made a living was to scrape off the top. Rome had a specific amount that they charged. The only way that they made amount was to scrape some off the top. And so on the spot, they would come up with taxes, because it was how they made a living. And Rome gave these collectors almost no oversight. In fact, oftentimes they would allow the people that had the highest bidding to do the actual tax collecting. So you had the full backing of the Roman government with virtually no accountability. So what do you think happened? Tax increase? Sure, why not? Skim a little off the top? Who's going to stop you? And if you don't pay, Papa Rome is going to deal with you. So in a lot of ways, tax collectors represented everything that the Jewish people stood against. You have pagan occupation. You've got paying funds to essentially fund their own oppression, and a system full of corruption and manipulation. So yeah, tax collectors weren't exactly those popular kids on the playground. But it's not just that people didn't like them. They were treated as moral traitors. Oftentimes they were shunned in the society. Many of the devout, if not all of the Jewish people, would have avoided them in the synagogue if they showed up at all. If they went, they treated them as cut off from the community. And this meant they would refuse to share meals with them. In fact, it would go so far as later on, in the Jewish commentary called the Mishnah, they would say that if a tax collector entered your home was spiritually unclean. This is why people who became tax collectors were generally the people who had already fallen out of society's good graces. It was kind of a last resort job. But Zacchaeus wasn't just a tax collector. If you look back at the verse, he was a chief tax collector. He ran the operation. In a city like Jericho with trade flowing in and out, this man was sitting at the top of the revenue food chain. I mean, he was essentially a mob boss with a government contract. People didn't just dislike Zacchaeus. They would have despised him. And I love this. N.T. Wright put it this way, is that the people of Jericho would have been horrified to learn of all the people in their town, he would be the one known by name 2,000 years later. That guy? Maybe it would have helped if they're like, at least he was known for being short. But this man, this mafia boss of Jericho, had one thing going for him. Read with me in verse 3. He wanted to see who Jesus was. But because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. And so he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. Jesus is coming through Jericho, and word had started to spread. I mean, Jesus is incredibly well known by this point. He healed a blind man as he entered Jericho right in the city gates. The man had called out to him, "Son of David." And Zacchaeus, this chief tax collector, this man with money and power and reputation, he wants to see who this guy is. Now think about what happens next. The crowd is thick. They all want to see Jesus. And we know why. He couldn't necessarily see over them. Probably didn't drink enough milk growing up or something. That's fine. He runs ahead. He knows where the parade route is headed. And he bolts ahead and he climbs up into this sycamore fig tree. A grown man, a wealthy man, a mob boss of Jericho, hiking up his robes and climbing a tree like a 10-year-old. Now, I don't know what you imagine when you think of Zacchaeus. Most of my mental images come from flannel graphs in kids' church, right? Now I quickly Googled some, and this is about what's in my mind. Look at this, Zacchaeus. Now, I don't know where the ladder came from, and I feel like I don't want to beat up the illustrator, but not great exegesis there. I don't know where the ladder came from. But this is like little kid Zacchaeus, right? He's like practically glowing in the tree. This is another good one. This is little Zacchaeus. Yeah. I like to think that they're like his only friend was a bird. I don't know if that's what they were going for, but Zacchaeus, friend of birds. I mean, in my head, I thought that he was this like little, tiny, little scared, wee little man, right? I don't know what you all think, but I thought of a scaredy cat. And honestly, given what we know about his position in the city, I decided to try and rethink this. And so I put all of that information into an image generator. Now, this is part of the problem, is because Chosen, I know the Chosen has done some great job of visualizing some Bible stories, but they've left this story out of the Chosen. I don't know if you know that. They obviously can't include everything. So I put all of that into an image generator, and I think what it came out is so much better, and I want to show it to you this morning. I think this is a little bit more accurate version of what he might have looked like. You laugh, but now if they ever do it in The Chosen, I do hope they get Danny DeVito. I don't know how expensive he will be, but he's got chains around him. He's got gold rings on. He does not look like the kind of guy who typically climbs trees, right? Here's another version, because obviously we're not trying to be super, super accurate, but another version. But we've got this guy who's not, he's no scaredy cat. He's running an entire tax collection operation. It's the only time in the Bible that chief tax collectors use. And I think Luke goes out of his way to say, this guy was at the top. I mean, in terms of tax collectors, this guy was running the show. And in that culture, for a man of any standing to run in public would have been considered undignified. Just to run in public. But to also climb a tree? I mean, that's incredibly embarrassing. That's the kind of thing people would have talked about. And Zacchaeus, a man who already has every reason to try and protect any shred of dignity he has left, right? He does it anyways. I don't really think Zacchaeus was looking to be transformed that day. I don't think he was looking to be saved. I think he just wanted to see. He was curious. And honestly, sometimes that's all it takes, right? Not some like big spiritual moment or a mountaintop experience or hours and hours of praise and worship. Sometimes it's just enough to be Christ curious. To put yourself in a position to receive. I want to say this as an aside, because some of you in this room may be in a place where you feel like your spiritual life is flatlined. You've been in a place where it maybe feels like you're praying to a wall, or reading the Bible feels like a chore, or you feel like the excitement that you once had, you don't feel that right now, and you feel like you're just like going through the motions, if anything. And there's two things that can happen. On the one hand, you can start to become cynical or just give up completely. And on the complete other extreme, I find people looking for the next experience. But I want to say to you that there's an in-between. And there's an in-between because we find it in Zacchaeus. That Zacchaeus didn't have a whole lot going for him. But Zacchaeus was curious. And if you find yourself in that position, I want to say to you, practice curiosity. Try and read the Gospels with a fresh perspective. Go into it asking questions you think you already have the answer to. Open up your mind a little bit and say, God, where are you today? Where are you in this moment? Help me find you. Be a little more curious. Maybe it'll involve climbing some trees. Maybe it won't. But I encourage you to be curious. Put yourself in a position to receive. Because that's what happens here. Zacchaeus climbs the tree to see Jesus. But it's Jesus who stopped and looked up. Look at verse 5 with me. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and he said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. Now, as word spreads that Jesus is coming to Jericho, I'm sure everyone is excited. I mean, the man they've been hearing about is here, the dead raiser, the food multiplier. the teacher. Some are probably even beginning to say, is this the Messiah? Like, is this the guy? And I'm sure every prominent family, I'm sure the Pharisees in town are all thinking the same thing. I hope he comes to my house. We'll host him for dinner. We'll invite the right people. We'll look at our influence. And the guy that everyone else looks past, the man that they wished would leave, the traitor, the cheat, Jesus sees him. And notice what he says. He doesn't say, hey, what are you doing up there? He doesn't say, Zacchaeus, why are you robbing these people? Knock it off. No. He says two words that change everything. He says the word immediately and must. Come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. Jesus is not asking. Jesus is not like, Zach, you free tonight? You got plans? Jesus is announcing something. There's an urgency and an intentionality here that we cannot miss. Of all of the homes in Jericho, all the prominent homes, all the religious homes, all of the Pharisees' homes, Jesus says, I must go to yours. Now put yourself in Jericho for a moment. Years of pain, outrageous taxes. Just for the opportunity, the privilege of oppression. You're scraping by on what little you have left. And Zacchaeus is over there building a second story on his house. Let me think about that for a moment. Some reports say that these people were paying as much as 50% in taxes, both on like the local level and the overall province level. 50%. You think your taxes are high? I guess we're getting close. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But listen, 50% of what they had. Think about that. The guy that's in charge of all of this. You're sitting there hoping Jesus sees you. You're in the crowd. Jesus is walking along. And he says to the guy who's been stealing from you, who's a traitor in your midst, come down, I want to go to your house. Read what they say, verse 7. All of the people saw this and began to mutter. He has gone to be a guest of a sinner. The crowd does what crowds do. He's gone to be a guest of a sinner. I mean, come on, Jesus. Seriously? That guy? But let's be honest, we've all done some muttering before, haven't we? We've done some grumbling. Have you seen her? He voted for who? They did what? We've murmured before, haven't we? I mean, before we write off the crowd, boy, I have done some murmuring. It's easy to murmur. It's easy to mutter. It is a whole lot harder to be merciful, isn't it? The crowd doesn't offer mercy. The crowd doesn't extend grace. The crowd only judges and executes. That's why we still have cancel culture today. Because we still do a whole lot of murmuring. And the crowd is almost always wrong. But Zacchaeus doesn't hear them. Or maybe he does, but this has happened long enough that he doesn't care. Because Jesus is coming to his house. and he's excited. The man who's been socially shunned, who wasn't even permitted to share a meal with his own people, this man is about to host Jesus for dinner. Come on. And remember earlier, many devout Jews refused to eat with tax collectors. Eating together in the ancient world was not this casual thing. A shared meal was an act of acceptance, of belonging, of covenant. To eat with somebody else was to say, you're one of us, your family. I look up to you. You're in my social circle. Now, we don't get the details of the meal. I wish we did, but we don't. Luke doesn't tell us what they ate or what Jesus said across the table from Zacchaeus. But we know what happened at the table because we can see what Zacchaeus looks like when he gets up. This happens in verse 8. But Zacchaeus stood up and looked to the Lord. Look, Lord, and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. Nobody asked him to do that. There's no altar call that evening that we know of. There's no prayer circle. I don't think Jesus put him through the Alpha course. Something happened at the table in the presence of being seen, being known, being welcomed, that made Zacchaeus want to become a different man. The meal did what sermons only dream of doing. We don't get a lecture from Jesus. No condemnation that we know of. And notice here, it wasn't the crowd's chastisement of him that changes him. He didn't change because the crowds are like, sinner, repent. He changed because Jesus said, I'm coming over. And look at this. Jesus responds with the most important words Zacchaeus has heard since come down. Jesus said to him, verse 9, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. Now this is interesting because we know from other stories in the Gospels that just being a son of Abraham does not automatically qualify you to be saved. We know this. Not long ago, I preached about Jesus and the awkward dinner party of the Pharisees. All of them were sons of Abraham, were they not? But Jesus is like, you guys don't get it. But here we've got a man who probably had not heard those words for his entire life. A man who was a Jewish man, an Israelite, who probably was the last person to have heard that phrase. Because they did not consider him a son of Abraham. He was a traitor at best. And what does Jesus do? He reaffirms that original identity. The identity that he thought was taken from him. Maybe he thought he'd even sold it to Rome. I'll sell that identity for some money. That's long gone. And Jesus says salvation has come because he too is a son of Abraham. And you can imagine the people around him going, no, Jesus, he is not one of us. He is not one of us. Are you kidding me? And yet that's the person Jesus says, you are a son of Abraham. Well, that's not the last thing he says, because he says, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And it's the last thing that Jesus says that we know. We know the save part, don't we? Jesus came to rescue, to redeem, to restore what was broken between us and God. That's the gospel, and it's beautiful. But it's not the whole gospel. Because there's a word right before save that is easy to skip right past. And it's the word seek. Because Jesus didn't just come to save Zacchaeus. He came looking for him. He didn't offer a life raft from a distance. Jesus sent a search party. He walked into Jericho. He stopped at a tree. He looked up and he called a man by name that everyone else had written off. And listen to me carefully, because that is not the kind of God waiting for you to get your life back together and then to come to him. It's not a God who's waiting for you to get your life cleaned up, get everything in order so that you can come and talk to God. That's a God who comes looking. And here's why that matters so much today, because Zacchaeus gets up from the table, and what does he do? He goes looking for the people that he wronged. He intends to seek them out. He intends to find them, to pay them back. The found becomes the finder. And he wasn't just checking off some list that Jesus gave him to do. Here, do this, 4 Hail Marys and a 1 Our Father, and give back to people. He's doing it because when you've been sought like that, when the God of the universe stops in the middle of his journey to Jerusalem, to the cross, and looks up in your tree, it changes you. How many of you on your journey has God found you in the midst of your crud? In the midst of your issues, in the midst of your unfaithfulness? Because God's not saying, hey, figure that stuff out and then you can come face the God of the universe. The God of the universe came down as a man, walked the streets of Jericho, got his sandals dirty, stopped at a tree and looked up and said, Zacchaeus, I'm coming over. What do my kids say when they are finally found? They scream, my turn. Because being found turns them into finders. And I think that's exactly what happens at this table. Somewhere between I'm coming over and pass the bread, something shifts inside of Zacchaeus. Because by the time he stands up from dinner, Zacchaeus is a different man. A different man than the man who climbed the tree. Half of his possessions to the poor. Right away, 4 times repayment to anyone that he's cheated. Now, this is interesting because there's Old Testament precedent for what to do in this scenario. If you cheat somebody out of money, there's a precedent in Leviticus that says you should give back what you stole plus 20%. There's also a precedent for livestock, that if you steal livestock, you should give back 4 times as much. Whatever it was that prompted it, Zacchaeus is not being shy here. If the law required 1.2 times or to give back 20% of what you stole, Zacchaeus goes far beyond that. And it's not just about the amount that goes beyond that. He's also giving away half of his net worth to the poor. Not because Jesus asked him to do this, not because there was a requirement. Now that you've become a Christian, make sure you give 10%. What happened at the table at Zacchaeus' house that day? I think what happened is that for maybe the first time in Zacchaeus' adult life, he was treated like a human being. That as people walked by him, they didn't shift their eyes. Not a title, not a tax collector, not a traitor, but as a person. He was treated as a person, as a guest, as a son of Abraham. And the thing that did it was a meal. I need you to hear this because I think we significantly underestimate what happens around a table. I think we think meals are just logistical, right? Just to do the thing to get to the next thing, something you squeeze between things that actually matter. We eat in our cars, we eat over our keyboards, stand up eating, scrolling our phones. I think we've reduced meals to just being calorie intake in some ways. Not all the time, but most of the time. But Jesus never did. If you go back through the Gospels, if you've read through specifically looking for it, a table is Jesus' primary strategy for change. Some of the most important moments in the Bible happen not in the temples, not in the synagogues, not even on mountaintops. They happen at tables. Because the table is this forcing function. It forces you to be present, to look somebody in the eyes, to stop performing and to start belonging. I mean, there's something about the physical act of sitting across from another person, of breaking bread together, that does what no program or event on Sunday or service can do. Am I right? In a world that's more connected and more lonely than ever, presence is the thing we're striving for. We're starving for presence. Now remember, Jews and especially the Pharisees, they just refused to eat with certain groups of people, like tax collectors. And it's here that Jesus goes out of his way to initiate it. He doesn't just end up there. He actually initiates it. He says, I must come to your house. He doesn't wait for the invitation. He pulls up a chair at the table of the most hated man in town. And it changes him. It changes everything. Zacchaeus had money. He had power. He had a nice house, most likely. But nobody would sit at his table. And when Jesus did, when one person said that I'm not too good to sit with you, that I'm not too important to sit with you, it wrecked him in the best possible way. And I wonder how many people in your own life are like Zacchaeus. Not literally a corrupt tax collector, but somebody on the margins. Someone people have decided isn't worth their effort. Someone who's been told by actions, maybe not necessarily by words, that there's no chair for you here anymore. Maybe there's somebody at work everyone avoids, or there's a neighbor that's like a little too much, a family member you stopped calling, the kids at your child's school who never gets an invitation. What if the most radical thing you did this year was not to join another Bible study or volunteer for another program, but it was to eat dinner with somebody? What if the most radical thing you did was eat dinner with somebody? That's what pull up a chair is all about. Hopefully you haven't missed it. That's our theme for the year. And we chose this not because it sounds cute, not even because it's trendy. In fact, we've heard it more since we started this, but we did it because ultimately we wanted to be more like Jesus. We're trying to follow Jesus, and that is exactly what he did. So let me ask you this. When Zacchaeus was found, the first thing he did was become a finder. He turns outward. He notices the people that he cheated, the people that he conned, he repays, he makes room for them at his table. When Cooper gets found, what does he do? He screams, "My turn." Starts looking for somebody else. And what I think Jesus is asking this morning is the same question. Because being found should turn you into a finder. You've been found, have you not? You've been seen. You've been welcomed to a table you didn't earn a seat at. So now whose turn is it? Who are you going to find? Who are you going to sit with? Who are you going to pull up a chair for? Last month when I was preaching, this is kind of message 1.5 of that. I was preaching about the awkward dinner party that Jesus had, if you remember. Pharisees invited him over and things got strange. And I asked you to invite somebody to coffee or lunch or whatever. And if you haven't done that, do that. Invite somebody over. Send out an invitation. Have a meal with somebody. I got to say, I was so encouraged. I'm not going to call anyone out by name, but I had preached and I had shared that. And obviously, you say these things and you really hope that these things kind of turn into stuff outside of Sunday morning. It doesn't really matter what happens here, but as long as you walk out of the building and you decide to put things into practice, that is the game changer. And so I was at Panera the next week and I saw a couple of you eating food together, and I went up and said hi, and they're like, you told us to get lunch with people, and I was so encouraged. I love that. So do that. Invite somebody for a meal. Share a meal with somebody. But I want to go one level deeper this morning. I want to ask you, who's the person you've judged? The person you've walked by. Maybe the neighbor you avoid. The people you don't want to be associated with. Who is the Zacchaeus in your circles? It's not always the people beneath you economically either. Zacchaeus had plenty of money. What he didn't have was the love of Jesus. And found people find people. So who do you need to spot? Who do you need to look at and say, come down? I see you. I'm going to close with this. We started talking today about a world of people who are connected but not known. 3 out of 5 Americans identify as lonely. And the answer to that problem is not another app, right? It's not another app or another follow or another like. It is a chair at a table. Because found people find people. And Zacchaeus, for probably the first time in his adult life, got found, and it changed the trajectory of his life. It changed the life of the people around him as they were paid back and had to wrestle with forgiveness. Cooper gets found and he screams, my turn. And church, I think that's what Jesus is saying to us today. You have been found. You've been sought after. You have been welcomed at a table that you didn't earn a seat at, and Jesus is looking for you. And it's your turn. Bow your heads with me. Jesus, we serve a God who came looking for us. God, how incredible is that you came looking for us? It wasn't up to us to try and figure out where you were. That God, you came looking for us and you found us. In our own little tree, wherever that was, you looked at us and said, come down. God, let us comprehend the power of that. We don't serve a God who's waiting for us to figure it all out and then come cleaned up. You want us to just come now because you've already called us. And Lord, I pray that would make us want to get up and say, my turn. I want to go find people. I want to see them for human beings in the image of God and show them the love of Jesus. God, light a fire in us this morning. And bring somebody to name. bring somebody to name in us that we should go after this week. Convict us, Jesus. In Jesus' powerful name, amen. If you feel like you have not found Jesus this morning, maybe you've been running and you're ready to turn your life and say yes to Jesus who's already on the hunt for you, come and see one of the prayer team members. They'll be up front. If you're looking for prayer, I encourage you, please come up, pray with one of our prayer team members. For the rest of you, grace, peace, have a great week.